And good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar with the topic today of being partnership across the business community. Today, we're going to be talking about just partnerships between businesses, nonprofits, and governments, which we all know have a lot of complexity baked into it. So we today have three leading experts in our fields to help kind of understand just the nature of partnership across the business community, because we know that when we are doing this, we're trying to understand just how we source, share products, services, markets, new technologies, logistics, all of the kind of the complexities is baked in to just the process of understanding how partnerships can help us kind of explore new avenues and get to where we want to go specifically for your business. So certain topics that we'll be talking about today will be defining and structuring of what a good partnership actually is, the types of partnerships that exist, how they differentiate from each other, with the specific amount of public-private partnerships, where are a very key structure between obviously the public and private sectors and kind of who is responsible for what, and then just how to actually create, where to start, and how to kind of get an initial partnership built into a long-term relationship. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Jacobs, who's going to be today's moderator. He will be leading the discussion with our three panelists. So over to you, John.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm just going to do, as I do every week, take us through a bit of an introduction, and we go through some quick stats. I will share with you that I have today been challenged with another MacGyver moment on my computer, so apologies if this is a bit of an awkward scenario here. Just give me a second, folks, and I'll share this presentation. So this is the NOVA EDA Business Resiliency Webinar Series, Beyond COVID-19. Today, September 10th, is the 11th in our series of 12, partnering across the business community. So as I mentioned, I'll take us through a bit of a, excuse me, let's see if I can get the thing here. You just heard from Chris Himes. Chris is assistant to the city manager of Manassas Park in Virginia. I'm John Jacobs, and I will take us through that summary. I will also in a moment launch a live poll and ask you, there are 5 questions in that poll. They're very brief questions. I'd ask you to please contribute your answers to that, because we're going to use your answers as part of this discussion toward the end, toward the middle of the overall presentations. Also, we take Q&A questions throughout. So at the bottom of your screen, if you mouse down, you should be able to see a tab bar that'll pop up. Go ahead and start submitting questions as you like. I think if you're on a Mac, it's at the top of your screen. Let me go ahead and just come out of this for a moment, and I will launch that poll. Apologies, I should have done so initially, but no time like the present. And again, these are five questions. Should be rather straightforward, and we appreciate all your contributions there. Go back over here. Just a moment, folks. It's my computer and my phone trying to catch up to me. Not that I'm talking that quickly. So as you well know, the PPP program closed on 7/31, July 31st. There is a balance of around $130 billion remaining. The EIDL loans are still available. Sorry, those are loans, not grants. They're not convertible to grants. The economic disaster relief loans. Importantly, by now, many of you are already filing for your PPP transition from a loan to a grant, and you want to complete that. I believe it's 10 months from the beginning of the grant period. The one form that's getting more and more popular is the 3508 EZ form, and that might make your lift lighter as you request that transition. Weekly unemployment numbers. This is out this morning from the Department of Labor, ending last week. So 857,000 filings as of Saturday or the week prior. The last 3 months, we've seen a decline in unemployment filings. That is 11% June, 10% July, 8.4% in August. That said, there has been a rather significant rise in filings through the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. And this is designed for gig workers, freelancers, and part-time workers. You can see a number here, 3.6 million additional incremental filings during the period 8/8 through 8/22. Quarterly GDP numbers, which we well know by now, 1Q is a 5% contraction in the economy. 31.7 in second quarter. Third quarter forecast is at 29.6, according to the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, which is a great rebound. The fourth quarter numbers, people are a bit sketchy on those numbers. It's a bit out there. Yet the Conference Board yesterday released a number that they perceive a 1.3% gain in economic expansion just in the fourth quarter. These are all annualized numbers, of course. Total coronavirus for COVID cases as of this morning, according to Johns Hopkins University worldwide, 22.5 million. That's an increase of 3.7 since the last webinar we had. US cases are up 863,437, now at 6.4 million. And US deaths this morning arose to 190,885, an increase of 17,681. The next bullet is actually the one of our panelists, and it was a wonderful article. I became aware of this, of our panelist. I'm not going to mention his name yet. But this is from Harvard Business Review, the current issue of Harvard Business Review. And this sort of gets on the topic in a more specific way of partnerships and joint ventures across the business community. And this is a quick quote. The 2019 Airbus Celanese Engie Vodafone Volkswagen relied on non-controlled joint ventures for more than 20% of their earnings. That's not the revenue piece, that's the net income piece. And we'll get more into these sorts of phenomena as we go through our discussion. We have three wonderful panelists this afternoon, excuse me. James Bamford, senior, coming back now. I also have this wonderful touch-sensitive screen. James Bamford, Senior Managing Director, Water Street Partners. David Erie, Chief Technology Officer with the Center for Innovative Technology. And R.J. Davies, Managing Partner of the Northern Virginia office of Pillsbury, Winthrop Shaw, and Pittman. Come out of this now because we have the actual live people with us this afternoon. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hey, John.
Let me just go into a little more depth on the introductions, if I may. James Bamford is co-founder of Water Street Partners, where he serves a global client base on joint venture transactions, governance, restructurings, and other partnership issues. Prior to Water Street, James co-led the JV, a joint venture practice at McKinsey. James is author of more than 100 articles on joint ventures, also the co-author of 2 books, Mastering Alliance Strategy and Water Street on Joint Venture Dealmaking. He has led more than 20 seminal research initiatives on joint venture performance and governance, and was the principal author of the CalPERS Joint Venture Governance Guidelines. He's also co-author, again, as I mentioned, of this issue of the article in Harvard Business Review entitled Joint Ventures and Partnerships in a Downturn. David Erie, Chief Technology Officer with the Center for Innovative Technology, 40 years industry experience as an innovator in the fields of satellite and terrestrial communication, computing, and information science. David has been a principal in 7 startup companies. In addition to his entrepreneurial activities, he's helped build 4 national scale business accelerators for the intelligence community, DHH, Homeland Security, and other areas of cybersecurity and smart cities. Currently, David is leading the Virginia Smart Communities Initiative and is working with the Virginia Unmanned Systems Center at CIT. R.J. Davis is the managing partner of the Northern Virginia office of Pillsbury, where he leads local, regional, national developers, lenders, equity funds, private and institutional investors, and JV partnerships in the commercial real estate space. So welcome, panelists. Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you all see that poll running in the background, which I suspect it is. James, let me, if I may, just kick off with you, from a sort of a 30,000 foot level. This series is entitled Beyond COVID-19. And we think about the impact of COVID to the US economy and other economies around the world. Are downturns really the right time to consider JVs and partnerships?
Yeah, the answer is maybe. It obviously depends on the individual company's circumstances. I think maybe to just set a little bit of context, first. When we look at deal trends, whether M&A trends, joint ventures, non-equity partnerships, what have you, deal volumes tend to go down during downturns, and certainly at the beginning of downturns, you see drops in deals. It's not to say there aren't any deals, but you tend to see a dip in deals. What though happens with JVs and partnerships is, for a variety of reasons, that we tend to see an increase in JVs and partnerships kind of in the back half of an economic downturn. So you could say they almost sort of presage a recovery. I think also it's one has to recognize that it takes a long time to get a deal done. So a deal that one was trying to put together in January undoubtedly faced COVID situation in that early transaction and have to change the deal construct. And typically it takes 6, 12, 18 months to get a deal done. I mean, you can talk about putting it together in a couple of months, but the reality is that that often doesn't happen. So, when deals are happening aren't necessarily, they're not happening weeks after a downturn happens, but we do see JVs and partnerships sort of coming back sooner than M&A and sort of on the back half of a downturn. And there are a lot of different reasons why one would form a joint venture or another type of partnership. But there's really 3 types that we tend to see that are specific to downturns. And they all have to do with sort of conserving cash or taking costs out of the business. So one is companies entering into JVs principally as a way to raise capital. So I may have a business or a business unit that I need cash for the rest of my business. So rather than selling it fully, I may bring in a partner who might buy 50% of that business, so effectively turning it into a JV. So that may be a staged exit, or it may just be a partial sale, and I end up with a partner in that business. So that's one category of kind of downturn-specific JVs and partnerships. A second are what I would call consolidation plays. So if I look at my business, there may be a competitor out there, and I don't want to merge with a competitor, but I look at a part of my business and say, hey, could I put that part of my business together with my competitor to take costs out of the system? So it may be consolidating part of my back office. It may be consolidating an entire business unit that I have. So sort of a consolidation at a business unit level. So we tend to see those increasing. There have been some really large transactions in the last couple of months that are of that profile. For instance, in the UK, O2 and Virgin Mobile consolidated their mobile and cable businesses, and is $39 billion transaction. So you tend to see those kinds of ventures, a variety of different consolidation plays. And it doesn't need to be billion-dollar businesses. I mean, it can be a local small business that's looking at some peer company and looking at ways that can we consolidate parts of our businesses to take out costs. And then the third category of kind of downturn-specific ventures that we see are growth-oriented, but kind of capital-light growth. So I may see an opportunity, but I don't want to fund 100% of that opportunity. So I bring in partners to help fund that. So I might do joint acquisitions as an example, or I might bring in a financial investor to help fund that opportunity, or I might pursue that opportunity jointly with a supplier or a customer. So rather than me investing 100% in that growth opportunity, to do that alongside another partner. Those are kind of downturn specific types of partnerships and JVs, but you also see kind of run-of-the-mill types of JVs and partnerships happening in a downturn too, to share costs and access capabilities and all of that kind of stuff. So the answer is maybe to your question, John, whether it's
that's a fine answer. It strikes me though that downturns are moments in time of different lengths that economies generally rise. Does that mean that some of these partnerships and JVs are much more are near-term opportunistic or not? During a downturn, you mentioned cutting costs or saving cash. What's the lens on that? What's the reach on that lens?
I think a downturn can either catalyze an opportunity to happen faster. I don't know that the opportunities are short term or long term, but I think the downturn can drive companies to entering into a partnership more quickly than they otherwise would, or you see incredible delay in deals dying because the uncertainty is so high that we're not ready to commit to something. What we do see is there's a lot more structures in a downturn that are contingent deal term based structures. So, John, you're in a business, I'm in a business, you have some complementary capabilities that I have, and we're looking to combine those into some type of venture. In a highly uncertain environment like today, you may make an argument that your capabilities, your intellectual property is worth $10 million. And that in a normal situation, you could justify that. But in the current environment, you might not be able to. So then we end up in terms of valuing contributions during a downturn, you do tend to see more contingent based deal terms. So, okay, John, I believe your IP is worth something, but I'm going to value it at $3 million going into this partnership, but then let's see how the business performs. And, if it performs extraordinarily well, then your contribution would be valued at more than $10 million. If it performs as you're saying it will, then it would be 10 million. So we tend to see more contingent based deal structures, but I'm not sure that I see more truly short-term oriented partnerships in a downturn than I would otherwise.
Almost by definition, the companies need to retain their individual competitive advantage, but partner perhaps or do a joint venture that achieves either cost reduction or new market expansion. And so that's a decision point for that business owner, right? They have to figure out, what's my secret sauce? What is it that I can merge an activity but keep myself unique?
Right.
Right. Yeah. JVs and partnerships, particularly I think on the partnership side, have a reputation, it seems to me, of infant mortality, right? Where they don't reach the expectation of the partners. And frankly, often there are bad feelings and folks walk away from that relationship. What drives that, and what are some remedies to it? James, did you hear the question? James? Yeah, James, you there?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, I thought it was you, John, but it was me. I lost my wireless there for a minute. Sorry, can you repeat?
If it's technology, it's probably me. So
that's what I thought. That's how you set this up. Yeah. Sorry, repeat the question for me.
The question is, a lot of these JVs, a lot of these relationships, whether they're partnerships or joint ventures, I have this instinct and this feeling, I think others do as well, that they die before their time. Infant mortality, that they don't reach fruition. What leads to that, and what might be some remedies?
I think one has to recognize going in that a joint venture or partnership is almost never, it's never like a marriage. I mean, that analogy is used all the time, but it's not, in most cases, intended to be forever or for a lifetime, right? I mean, it's for a purpose to access a market or do something. And, the lifespans vary. I mean, we are seeing that lifespans of JVs, which is different than non-equity partnerships, but the JVs is increasing somewhat. But, over the last 25 years, it's gone from 7 years median lifespan to 10 years. So still way short of, forever. And I think one has to recognize you've got at least two, by definition, different companies with different strategies, with different risk appetites, they may meet at a moment in time, but they're dynamic, and your company's moving in a direction, my company's moving in a different direction. We can stay together working on something for a while or for a couple of years, but just because it ends after 3 years or 5 years doesn't mean that it wasn't a success. Hopefully you didn't spend all of that time trying to get the thing to work, that you could actually, generate returns in the near term. But one has to recognize that these things are going to end. And then we need to think about, what does the exit look like, right? This is not an acquisition, right? It's it's not that. And so how do we get out of this thing and not end up being stuck in the venture and not being able to exit in any easy way? So exit provisions are a key piece of any type of these partnerships.
Great, great. David Erie, you sit in this the role as Chief Technology Officer at CIT, but just the existence of CIT, and it strikes me as this massive intersection, right, of startup companies and innovation and funding and grants and opportunity. You have in your organization, I'm going to ask you to give us that a bit of an elevator pitch on your programs, because I want everybody in the audience to understand how extensive the work is at CIT and how relevant it is to you in the audience. You may not even consider CIT as a possible partner with whom to work, yet that may need to be revisited. So I'm going to again attempt to share my screen and show one slide. Drum roll, please. Let's see what happens here. Just a moment.
While you're doing that, thank you, John.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, CIT's been around actually since the late 1980s. We're a not-for-profit, so we operate as a standalone not-for-profit, but as an extension of the state government in Virginia. And our focus is around economic development, specifically around technology-based innovation, entrepreneurship, and commercialization. So we operate under a special legal authority from the state, the Virginia Innovation Partnership Authority, and CIT then is the not-for-profit operating entity for VIPA. You can see on the chart we have 4 primary operational areas, and each one of those has kind of a supporting mission to the overall mission of the not-for-profit. So our entrepreneurial ecosystems division really is working across the state to interact with, to gain synergy, to gain operational efficiencies for the accelerators, the incubators, the technology transition offices that exist in the various regions around the state. That's a new piece of our mission, and but it's up and running. We've had a great set of discussions already around the state, and a strategic plan is coming together for that. The commercialization division is really focused around grants, and these are commercialization grants, early stage companies or university-based researchers, and how can we take innovative intellectual property and help move that towards commercial application. And we track in that area a number of patents that are generated, a number of jobs and so forth. Has been a hugely successful program for a number of years. The investment division makes equity investments in early stage companies, and for a number of years now, CIT's GAP funds actually has been the most active investor in Virginia in terms of the number of deals that we do. There are currently about 150 companies in our portfolio. They tend to be, because they're all early stage kinds of investments, you know, the dollar amounts tend to be smaller, but it's not unusual for us to be the first money outside equity investment into a company. And I run the strategic initiatives portfolio for the Commonwealth. So that's a forward-looking activity, looking at what industries we believe will be important economically for the Commonwealth over the next 3 to 5 years, and how can we position the Commonwealth to grow those industries, to develop the people to provide the job opportunities in those industries. In that context, that's where I work with the DHS program, the science and technology effort around public safety and innovations for public safety, the smart communities activity that we've been running for several years now across the Commonwealth, the Unmanned Systems Center at CIT, and of course the use of drones in the Commonwealth. Commonwealth is rated #1 for the UAV industry again this year, so we're very proud of that. And some of the earlier work in helping start accelerators like Mach 37 and like Smart City Works have been as part of that. So it's a very broad-ranging set of capabilities. We also do some training programs for companies are interested in federal grants, such as the Small Business Innovation Research Grant. So we have for a number of years helped Virginia punch way above its weight in terms of getting SBIR awards from the federal government. So, as you say, for anybody who's interested in that, particularly smaller companies, innovative companies, we see ourselves as hopefully one of the first stops that they make in looking for support. And we view that generally as a long-term partnership with those companies. So we're very active in terms of not just placing an equity investment, for example, but entering long-term mentoring relationships or advisory boards, those types of engagements with the companies that we invest in.
Great. Thanks for that. It strikes me, I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. You mentioned Mach 37 as an accelerator. Tell us what that is. I don't actually understand.
Sure. So a typical business accelerator, and Y Combinator in California, for example, was one of the earliest, best known ones. A typical program will run a couple of cohorts of startup companies. A typical model is 6 companies twice a year, but those numbers vary. And the way we have implemented those is as an extensive, in-depth mentoring program. Some people have called like Mach 37 the equivalent of a graduate degree in business in 13 weeks. But it goes beyond the training because we also make equity investments in those companies. We see that as at least a 2 or 3 year partnership with those founders, and help them grow their business, help them create partnerships or introductions to people who might be good partners with them, help early market entry, help partnerships with larger companies, perhaps the type of JV structures that we're talking about. And one of the interesting things actually we've seen over and over again, which kind of always surprises me, is when we get a group of 6 or 8 companies, early stage companies together, almost naturally they form partnerships among themselves. I think particularly when it's a vertically focused market accelerator like cybersecurity or smart communities, people tend to have complementary capabilities. We try to select companies that way, and the support group of knowing other founders in similar situations is, in addition to the business aspects, is really important to help companies grow, to help them avoid pitfalls and so on.
And that verticalization point is a good one. I know from my own background when it comes to advanced wireless communication, which is a current initiative originally funded out of the National Science Foundation. And again, public-private opportunity here. And working with organizations like US Ignite, then they are looking to populate along that value chain or vertically the right set of folks to play. So I think that's something not to be brushed aside, is the vertical nature of some of these relationships. One last one is FEND. Is that a case study? I think that was an SIBR award winner, right? SIBR? Did I have that right?
SBIR.
SBI. So can you, in brief, tell us what FEND did successfully and where they are?
Sure. So they're, I think they're a really great example. They came to us as a early stage startup company. We're just getting formed. We worked with them through one of the accelerator programs to help them develop their business model and so forth. And over the course of a couple of years, we have they've been through most of the programs that I described. So they went through our SBIR training program and were able to secure several of those grants. We did a direct grant to them from our Commonwealth Research Commercialization Fund. We've also made an equity investment in that company. They do infrastructure protection, sort of information diodes to protect cyber attacks against critical infrastructure.
Sort of hardening of physical infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly large scale things, power plants and so forth.
Sure.
And now we've made a number of introductions for them to both municipalities around the Commonwealth, but also to larger commercial partners who are in the infrastructure market. So when you talk about that vertical integration, they've been able to partner with larger companies who help them get to market, provide scale for them that they would have a difficult time doing on their own.
And on that topic of the public-private partnership side, which is another version of PPP, not the other one, but RJ, you work a lot with local and state government and private sector organizations to achieve those types of. Are they mainly infrastructure partnerships? Tell us a bit about that. And as we spoke and sort of preparing for this, real estate struck me as one of the much more complicated type of relationships, because you have a state authority, a local authority,
right,
a developer,
right. Yeah, so they tend to be very highly structured projects, and a staple of my practice are joint ventures. And when you bring in a municipality or a government entity, of course, it becomes a public-private partnership. Of course, my focus is in real estate, and so the projects tend to be centered on real estate. And in the case of governments or municipalities, it centers around usually their excess real estate. On the one hand, they have excess real estate that they may not be using, and almost certainly they would like some infrastructure improvements without having to fund them. The private sector is very good at that. They're very entrepreneurial, as we've heard from our panelists today. And that merger between those two groups lends to a lot of projects. Two sort of recent examples that I think are sort of relevant to the folks today would be, we've worked on several military housing projects representing the private developers, where the military wants to build new housing. Of course, they don't necessarily have the access to the funding immediately anyway to do that. They partner with the private sector to bring in their expertise in construction and development, and of course financing, work together, get the project up and running, and the private sector participates in the rent stream. Another example is the Metro. We've worked on several projects, and Metro has been very active in recent times, trying to utilize their excess real estate and make that available for developers to develop in exchange for them providing infrastructure that usually is quite needed around what is oftentimes aging infrastructure around the various stations. So those are two sort of obvious, easy to digest examples of where real estate meets joint venture public-private partnerships.
I'm always curious when I hear public-private partnerships. I think about power. Is it a scenario where one party has greater power than the other? And here, of course, I'm thinking of the state. No, I don't mean the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I mean lowercase state. Or is that the whole point? That whole point is to strike a deal where there's this equilibrium.
Yeah, that's clearly the goal. One of the things that I strive to counsel folks is he who has the real estate makes the rules, right? That's the purpose of the venture, and so there can be a little disparity in the perhaps negotiating power. But I think the way you solve that is multifold. One is you want to partner with presumably someone who has experience and who has a track record. That they have the track record of completing a transaction, right? And will act reasonably and want to get to the goal of completing the venture. In this case, building the infrastructure and allowing the developer to do what it does best. The other thing, I think, the way you deal with that sort of disparity is it takes very thoughtful, and James brought this up early on, it's a long process. And it takes a very thoughtful term sheet analysis from the get-go with very defined goals. And staying focused on those goals and kind of letting the rest of it play out, I think lends to the successful venture and allowing the project to go forward with, what are often a little bit of a, disparate, rights among the parties.
Here's a question for all three of you, because I keep, in my head keeps saying IP protection, just to change it, but you're an attorney, RJ, so I want you to maybe you can give a view on this too. So you have a technologist, we have a strategy leader, and we have an attorney. And so when it comes to intellectual property that is developed by a JV or developed by a partnership, how are those issues resolved once that partnership is going to be ended? So what are some of the common problems? I'm going to throw this at James first. So ask James to comment about this, because I have to imagine when you're structuring a deal commercially, IP, the evolution of IP through the JV or the partnership is got to be front and center.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of aspects to it. So, if IP is being contributed into the JV, or there's a question of how are we going to contribute it? Or if we have this intellectual property, are we going to license it in? Or are we just going to fully contribute it and then we don't own the IP anymore? So there's a big question. If I have IP, how is it being put into or made available to the partnership? And there are a lot of different ways to do that. Second question is IP that is developed through the partnership, who has ownership rights to that, both during the life of the venture as well as, and probably more importantly, after the venture concludes in whatever way. So IP is jointly developed. If the partnership becomes unwound, does each partner then have ownership of that IP that gets developed, or does one partner end up with ownership of it and the other partner has royalty-free rights to use that? So there are a lot of very complicated intellectual property questions that can come up in a joint venture or a partnership. It's hard to generalize what the answers would be. And then I guess there's a whole different question if you read the news and look at China, for instance. I mean, joint ventures can be a terrific way to lose intellectual property as well as your a partner, doesn't need to be a Chinese partner, but your partner ends up using the joint venture as a vehicle to learn from you and replicate, being able to develop that IP on their own and then compete against you. So there's a lot of issues around intellectual property in a joint venture or partnership.
David, do you have any thoughts on that as a technologist?
Couple thoughts. So, one is we've had interesting experience with the federal government, particularly the Homeland Security work we're doing around public safety. Our interest and the interest of the government is to have products or capabilities get to market successfully to the end users. So, the federal government in particular, although they like to claim intellectual property rights, generally don't do anything with those. And so we've explored a couple of interesting ways to make sure the intellectual property stays with the developer, because that's in everybody's interest. And I will just a little bit, if I can piggyback on some of RJ's comments a little earlier around public-private partnerships and municipal environments. So one of our showcase projects now is with Stafford County. Stafford County is developing a new downtown Stafford, and they came to us, so they have the real estate. They came to us and said, hey, we want to make this smart. What do we need to do to make that happen? And in that case, what we've done is we CIT entered an MOU with the county, a memorandum of understanding. So we have the government-to-government interaction with them to establish a test bed right near their government center. And we're we have 14 different projects that are ongoing right now to showcase different advanced technologies that could be components of a smart community or a smart downtown Stafford. In those cases, we don't have any, again, we don't have no interest in encumbering the intellectual property of the innovators. Our success is when they succeed in the market. And so it's kind of a nice closed form of a little bit different structure, but because our interests are in the economic development rather than in gaining competitive advantage through intellectual property, it turns out, I think, to be pretty beneficial for all parties.
RJ, because last word on this one, I mean, a lot of cat fights out there in this topic, not necessarily within real estate, but
yeah. Well, I mean, let me actually just give it a little bit of a real estate a bent for a minute. One of the things that makes a successful public-private venture is to think about and plan for the exit. James mentioned this a minute ago. Understanding that and thinking that through at the beginning is a real key to success. And real estate ventures tend to have a common goal. And once you achieve that goal, having a good strategy or an architecture in place that allows you to receive the benefit of that when the time is right is a really important piece to the project.
Great. And to the audience, folks, we're going to close that poll now. So if you haven't contributed to the answers, it's just 5 quick questions. Please do so. And I'll just take a quick look here and see if I can just, oh good, we have a healthy response. So I'm going to close the poll. We'll look at the results, and I'll just read through the results so that, so we're all on the same page. And I encourage the panelists to please offer comments as well, observations. So the first question I have here, if I can read my own question, is your company currently engaged in a corporate partnership, public-private partnership, or joint venture? 63% responded no. So not very active in this field at the moment. Second question, and I'll just read through if you folks have comments. What would be your principal goal or goals of entering into a partnership or joint venture? And it looks like number 1 response was increased distribution or market size. That's an interesting answer. I like that. And then sort of equally both reduce costs to risks and expand product line with and accelerate innovation. Those are sort of neck and neck for second position. So very interesting. Third question was, with whom are you most likely to partner? And the number 1, tied again is both competitor and a government agency, a public-private partnership. The least responded answer tied was a customer or a nonprofit. Fourth question, how long would you expect a partnership or JV relationship to last? And 47%, the largest response group, cited beyond 5 years. So beyond 5 years, so a relatively long view of the expectation of that relationship. And number 5, finally, what concerns you the most about engaging in a partnership or joint venture? And the largest response is a risk of failure of the new venture or relationship. 0 respondents sort of toggled off of outpacing your legacy business, which that's great. My view is that you see it as an integrated part of your overall success, probably. I'm surprised that loss of control was this low, because I would be fearful if it were my business. To you folks, as James, RJ, or Dave, do you have observations on these responses?
I'm happy to start. I think, unlike M&A, JVs and partnerships, there's such a wide variety of these. I do think if you think about what I would call non-equity partnerships, so we're not creating a separate company, but it's more than a commercial relationship. It doesn't surprise me that the folks answered that, using JVs to increase distribution. So, using it as a vehicle to enter into new markets. So, sales or otherwise, or on the R&D innovation side. I mean, you do tend to see high volumes of non-equity partnerships or non-JV partnerships. on sales, marketing, distribution side, as well as on the research side. And then, when you're entering into a non-equity partnership, control is less of an issue than when you're creating a separate joint venture entity and putting contributions into that new company. If I'm a pharmaceutical company, a biotech company, I enter into a non-equity alliance to co-promote, co-market my products with a pharmaceutical company. There would be exclusivity related to that and a set of things, but I'm not really giving up control of my company. I'm entering into a partnership to help distribute, market my product in a particular geographic market or to a particular market segment. So I'm not terribly surprised, given that we're talking about JVs and non-JVs here, that the loss of control thing ranked as low as it would. I think if we were just talking joint ventures, I would expect that that to be much higher.
So a couple comments. I'm looking at question number 3, with whom are you most likely to partner? So first of all, on the nonprofits, let me just say, CIT is a nonprofit, so hopefully some of the audience will reconsider that if they're in a position where we can help them. But the other one that surprises me there is that partnering with customers actually ranked as low as it did. Because when you talk about vertical integration, and particularly in our case, we look a lot at smaller technology-based companies partnering with larger system engineering companies or market leaders in their space. In many cases, those larger companies don't necessarily want to be involved in the technology at the level of detail as a smaller company does. That vertical integration can be I think an important, one important path to market growth and penetration. So, again, there, and certainly as a market feedback signal, we like to get end users and customers involved early in the development of certainly startup companies, because their perception of what the market needs are, and how to sell into that market are really important. So I would encourage people to take another look at both of those areas.
I'll make one comment on the poll. The one that stood out to me was the lifespan of a joint venture. So in sort of my practice, there's a real dichotomy. It's either in the relatively short, we'll call it 3 to 5 year window of a traditional joint venture to develop a project, and then it's been developed and there's an exit. But the more interesting one is in the public-private partnerships. When it comes to real estate, it usually takes the form of a very long-term ground lease, oftentimes 99 years. So, you have this relationship that will be ongoing for, multi-generations. And so when I hear your audience, say, it's more likely to be longer than shorter, I think that, at least in sort of the area that I work in, it's pretty typical.
Just on that, RJ, is it a scenario where if you're in a public-private partnership and you have your specific role within that partnership in an organized way, that the investment is much deeper from an ROI perspective? It's much more assured, I should say, because if you get to the completion of the project, you're going to have either a piece of the ongoing revenue, you're going to have your own revenue streams off of the real estate deal itself. Is there more safety in a public? Here's a loaded question. Is there more safety in a public-private partnership on its face than a private-private partnership? I know I just pulled a pin in a hand grenade there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I don't have a really pat answer for you. I think I've seen both. Real estate development projects, which is what most public-private partnerships are, tends to be a pretty risky endeavor. A lot of capital up front, a lot of risk to get the entitlements and pull all the team members together. And so if you achieve that, and then you have, as you noted, John, a long-term runway of what's anticipated to be an income-producing asset, I it's pretty good. That initial period of a public-private partnership, at least centered on real estate, not so much. And it takes very specialized, groups, good team members with experience to pull all of the requisite expertise to pull it off.
And James, just on the sort of the private side of that question, is this risk abatement, is it based on the size of the opportunity, or is it how well structured the deal is on the front end? If we assume that private partnerships have some risk in them, is it just based on that? Is it just a risk analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess you could think of. I mean, there's a paradox here, which is JVs and partnerships are often one reason to enter into them is to mitigate risk, financial or other risk, right? Let's pursue an opportunity together so that we increase our odds, and then if it doesn't work, we've spent less money on that opportunity. So they're often used, and I think poll question number 2, if I remember right. Yeah, so reduced costs or risk is one reason why you enter these. But JVs and partnerships, paradoxically, also introduce their own types of risk, sort of relationship risk. So, and there are many of them, but if I'm in some kind of business enterprise with another company or organization, I have decision-making risk because presumably I can't just do whatever I want to do, right? I mean, I may get stuck, right? There's an interesting opportunity over here, but my partner doesn't have the capital or the interest to pursue that through this partnership. There's intellectual property leakage risk that we talked about. There's, outside of the United States, you could even say inside the United States, if you think about anti-bribery and corruption risk, if I'm in business in an emerging market with a local partner, then all of a sudden I'm exposed to a whole set of things. There's antitrust risk in joint ventures and partnerships with competitors. So paradoxically, JVs and partnerships are often used to mitigate risk, but they introduce these kind of relationship risks that have to be managed. And I think those risks are partly why you see a lot of these JVs and partnerships, and real estate is a particular type, but why you see the lifespans being as short as they are, because companies don't want to tolerate those risks anymore.
Interesting. We have a few questions. We're kind of moving on and closing our time, but let me just rattle off the first one here. I see looking to joint ventures with other companies who are manufacturing to be a distributor or a reseller, option to joint venture to go after the large procurement vehicle for 5 to 10 years. I think that question is, do a joint venture for distribution, or do I build it myself? I sense that's what I'm getting from that question. And panel, you can see that question as well. Maybe I've misinterpreted.
I'm happy to take that. I think that maybe stepping back a half step, one needs to think about a continuum of relationships. So, if I'm interested in getting my products in market, products or services into markets that I don't exist in, I can do that myself. I can build my own sales force, et cetera. That's not a partnership. I can enter into some commercial arrangement with a sales agent or something it's not really a partnership. I mean, there may not be any notion of exclusivity or capital that's committed or anything like that. It's just a commercial arrangement to get my products and services into that market. Or I can enter into something that's more exclusive, potentially longer term. That doesn't mean I create a separate company like a joint venture, but it is in my mind, when it has exclusivity, a duration that is beyond a few months, in years, et cetera. Like I'm really committing something. Then you start to enter the realm of the partnership, and then, setting up a separate joint venture entity. You often don't do that just for distribution and sales, though. In some cases you're required to by regulations in certain markets. So, and then, as you think about that, there are a set of markets I want to play in. Do I want one distributor in a particular type of partnership, or am I going to pursue a whole set of kind of one-off distributors or agents? So I think one has to think about what's my growth strategy, and then what's my kind of partnering strategy within that. And it's, I mean, it's hard to generalize what the answer would be, but there's just a continuum of relationships that one has to think about if you're not going to go build it yourself. And in many cases, they're just commercial arrangements. They're not really partnerships.
Great, thanks for that. Then another question, I'll just read this, unfortunately we'll be out of time. And this is, do you see partnerships or joint ventures or other associations, that lowercase again, happening in the current environment just as a way to survive or for staying relevant in the current market? So this goes sort of back to the earlier conversation about, are these opportunistic temporal decisions or are they strategic? And I'm just trying to think, David, maybe you could sort of address that. I mean, I know your background as a startup. I mean, you helped start 7 companies. How would you perceive that?
Well, so, you know, I mean, certainly as we've talked about, if they're getting costs out of the business or things like that you can do in the short term that help survival, I mean, I think that's, you know, not a crazy idea. But, you know, I think as we've spoken all along, probably the real upside of partnerships is the longer term set of relationships that you bring together. And there are certainly, even in the economy that we're dealing with today, there are parts of the economy that are growing. And, you know, I think if you look back to 2008, 2009, there were a number of companies that started up during that time period that have been very successful since. So, you know, I think, you know, anybody who's thinking strategically about their future, you know, just because the current environment is difficult doesn't necessarily mean you want to give up on strategic focus on how you intend to grow your business over the longer term.
Great, great. So I think, folks, I'm just going to, I think we're out of time for questions. Let me just thank the panel, thank the audience for joining us. And what I'll do is I'm going to share the upcoming next week. So not in 2 weeks, but next week we're going to have, oops, sorry, that's not the one I wanted to share. But now you can see why I'm doing my my MacGyver maneuver. We're going to have our final of the series webinar, and that's entitled, hold it, I got it. Yes, strategic planning in a digital world. So it focuses on strategic planning, and the assumption being that during this period of COVID, there's been a lot of need to transition to a digital scenario, a digital environment, and folks were caught in various steps of preparedness for that. And so we'll talk about that. We have a great panel confirmed for that for next week as well. That's Thursday, the 17th of September, 2 p.m. Eastern, just same time as this. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks for